All right, this video today, this is gonna be a big one. It's gonna get complicated, so I definitely need you to pay attention. Hopefully my video editor on this can break down visually the math I'm about to explain. Landlords. Real estate was probably the most popular thing to get involved with when it comes to investing back in 2020. So maybe even 2019 and before that. Since post-COVID, the internet has gone crazy. So many people are talking about real estate. Hedge funds are more active than ever, and we are here and everyone understands the power. But the thing that a lot of people forget is that they haven't been in the game that long, including me. So what do most landlords want? They want what landlords have that have been in the game for 30 years. They want equity. They want the same thing, which is appreciation. They want rent increasing, and they want to be able to be retired and have a passive income that allows them to have that freedom. And the reality is we're in a market that is softening. And when I say the market, I mean the rental market. There are more days on market even with the rentals I manage. When I first got in, it'd be 1 to 2 days. You'd sign a lease, get the next tenant in. And the cash flow for that landlord was protected by how much demand there was in the market. Now, our team has filled the last 65 units that our team has leased have been on average completed with a 28-day on-market statistic, which is what I'm aiming for moving forward as well. I always tell landlords, give me 4 weeks and then we can talk about what we need to be doing past the range of prices I've given them that I will land a well-qualified tenant in their unit on. But now more than ever, I'm getting new landlords to jump over to Stonebrook because the property that they owned has been sitting vacant for too long in their opinion and also in mine. So leasing departments are super important in making sure cash flow stays optimal. And that's what today's video is on. It's not on the actual going and marketing, it's on the turnovers and the lease renewals and trying to keep tenants happy so that way they stay and it keeps stabilizing the property that you own today, allowing you to get through this slower time, this softer time in the rental market and get back on track to increasing rent in the years to come. So what makes a property cash flow the best in a downward market? Not having vacancies, keeping tenants happy. And I'm not talking about Christmas baskets at the front door. I'm talking about how can you positively affect your tenants and encourage them to stay. And even when they do wish to stay, how do we make sure that they have a successful experience and can pay every month while their car bill wants their money, the grocery man wants their money, the car insurance, the phone bill, everything is racking up in life. We can all feel it on every level. Whether you're a multimillionaire or a minimum wage employee, we all feel the cost of living right now. And as a landlord, you probably control 30 to 35% of the cost of living on your tenant. Because even if you had a requirement of 3 times monthly income to get qualified to live at your property, that is quite literally 33% of the cost of living of that family is you, the landlord. So what can we do to avoid massive losses over the next year when it comes to having a portfolio and being a landlord? We simply need to look at rent. It has to be mentioned. I have to talk about it. As any property manager in this town, you know that at the end of the day, if people can't afford it, it's not going to be successful. Even when someone wants to rent a house or continually rent a house and the rent has gone up and we know their income has not, the chances of this being a successful relationship between property manager, tenant, and landlord is dwindling. So let's talk on the numbers. Let's talk on what can we do and why should we do it. So I recently sat down with one of my favorite landlords I manage for. He owns roughly 75, a few more, but I want to keep the math simple. So let's say 75 units. And one of his biggest concerns was the upcoming year. and how well his properties were going to cash flow. Right now, rent's getting paid, units are filled, but like any smart business person, you have to look at the future and be able to read and see the writing on the wall of what we all perceive will happen. And in a softening market, he is well aware that he can incur direct and indirect costs in the coming 2026 calendar year. Those costs can be mortgage, taxes, insurance, but what I want to speak on specifically is lost rent, so rent that could have been collected, but the unit is vacant, and the cost of actually turning over the property. So all of the small repairs that get involved with making sure that once you go to market, that the unit is well liked by people walking it and they wish to apply and move in. So that could be cleaning, garbage removal, painting, and then on larger projects, you could be installing newer floors, cabinetry, fixing doors, windows, all the shebang that can happen during a turnover. So what does the napkin math say? So let's say a tenant moves out and the unit sits vacant for 8 weeks total. That is, tenant moves out, the turnover begins, the maintenance team gets inside the unit, they repair, clean up, make it ready for market, property gets marketed, property gets filled with a tenant signing a lease, day one tenant moves in. If you can accomplish all of that in 8 weeks, the reality is that's pretty fast. And let's say the rent for this unit is $1,000 for easy math. So $1,000, 8 weeks of lost rent, so that would be $2,000 total of lost rent. And let's look at the turnover cost when it comes to repairs. So cleaning, garbage, paint, all the things I previously mentioned. Let's say that average cost is $1,000. So no significant damage happened, but a healthy budget, so we're conservative on our projections. So $1,000. So we have $2,000 in lost rent and $1,000 in turnover cost on average. That means indirect and direct cost combined is $3,000. Now, the other important thing we need to talk on is vacancy rate. So a lot of people, especially people that only own a few rental properties, like less than 10, look at vacancy rate as a make-all, do-all, and it's not. Vacancy rate can be very low, let's say 3%. So what would 3% of the 75 unit portfolio equal with vacancy rate? That would be, what is 3% of 75 units? It is 2.5 units. If you're sitting here thinking, oh, well, 2.5 units a year, that's really, really good. Well, it's 2.5 units vacant at a time. A turnover rate is something that is way more important. So a turnover rate is a variable that we actually need to know. It is the most important variable when it comes to looking at this indirect and direct cost we're analyzing. Your turnover rate in an average market and with a good property manager is roughly 25% to 30%. That's nationwide. So what is a turnover rate in the first place? A turnover rate is how often a tenant moves out versus renews. So on those 75 doors, how many of those can we expect for tenants to be moving out? That is your turnover rate. So with a 30% turnover rate, which is again an average statistic, you will end up with how many vacancies that year? 22.5. So now let's go back to the cost. Rent is $1,000. We did not collect it for 8 weeks, which is 2 months. So 2 months of rent lost is $2,000. The turnover costs us $1,000 on average between paint, cleaning, and big garbage removal like a king mattress and a couch. And so the $2,000 of indirect cost and the $1,000 of direct cost equals the $3,000 of total loss. Multiply that by your 22.5 doors with a modest 30% turnover rate, and you are now at $67,500 in total cost, indirect and direct combined. And that, my friends, is why larger landlords take a look at this statistic so much more than smaller landlords. And that is why leasing departments are so important with the renewal process. We don't want that house to go to market because it needs to stay stabilized in a downward market. So more napkin math. Let's say instead of that Christmas basket saying thank you for being a tenant and paying market rate, which we both know will not help that tenant in the long run succeed at being on time with their rent and wishing to stay at that unit, let's reduce their rent by $75. So even on a $1,000 rental, which $75 is a big percentage of, that would add up to $900 in lost indirect costs a year per unit, which is me taking $75 multiplied by 12 months, which equals your total indirect cost of $900, because if rent was $1,000 that year and you lowered it $75, you indirectly lost that $900. But what did we avoid? We avoid that turnover that has an indirect and direct total cost of $3,000. So in an extreme situation where we positively avoided all turnovers, so all tenants stayed throughout the entire year, vacancy rate is 0, turnover rate is 0, we end up having to do the napkin math again, which is the $75 of discounted rent in order to try to maintain that relationship, allow the tenant to save money during their monthly bills, to be successful paying on time and avoiding them leaving the property in total. We take that, multiply it by 12 months, and because this landlord has 75 units, we have to multiply that by the 22.5 leases that would have been turnovers at a 30% turnover rate, and it equals our entire cost of $20,500 for the year. So that math doesn't really make sense when you think about it, because if you have everyone on 12-month leases, you're going to end up with all 75 coming due and having to do the math on all 75, because you always have a turnover that could happen. But a good leasing agent and a good property manager is just trying to withhold it down to the 30% turnover. That's where it boils down to having a good team and knowing that you're not gonna bat 100% and hit all these home runs. You have to make sure that when the time comes, you have a system that allows you to not have to discount every single unit to end up with all of this loss, but you also don't want to force a vacancy by having tenants be unsuccessful with paying rent because all of their bills have just climbed through the roof. And we also want to encourage them to stay and see the value in the relationship they have with us and the product they're renting monthly by getting that discount. So all in all, it's a very complicated equation. So here's the napkin math. If every single lease renewal comes due in a year, most leases are 12 months. So in the calendar year of 2026, you will renew or have the opportunity to renew all 75 doors of this landlord's. And if we know that the average turnover rate in America is roughly 30%, we have already done the math on screen and can see a cost of $67,500 for the year. On the contrary, if we discount every single tenant in order to encourage them to stay as a tenant, appreciate the value of the relationship and the product they rent, along with setting them up to be successful with paying rent on time every month for the next 12 months, $50 times 12 for the 12 months multiplied by 75 units would be $45,000 in all indirect cost, which is just simply lost revenue, but no direct cost with physical turnover repairs. Even when you do the extreme by discounting your entire portfolio, you save thousands, because option A, go with the crowd, do the average thing, and try to perform as best as possible and get hit with $67,500 in total indirect and direct cost. Or option B, go the other extreme way and attempt to have 0 turnovers and offer rent $50 cheaper than the previous year and only an indirect cost of $45,000 for the year of 2026. There is an art to this. You have to know when and where. There's probably going to be a video soon on me going over that. There's videos I've done on the 8% rule. Take a look on my channel here. That gets involved with this turnover conversation. I appreciate you jumping in. Either way, guess what? Rent's due.